Thank you to Omar and Leslie for inviting me, and thanks everyone for coming. Just start my, can you guys hear me okay in the back if I speak at this level? Okay.
Maybe we press the lecture.
What's that?
The lecture.
Oh, I have to push the lecture button. Thank you. Okay. I had planned today to talk about the Wandering Lake. This is a project I worked on for 8 years. It started from, it was inspired by a book by Sven Hedin called The Wandering Lake, where he searches for a shifting body of water in the deserts of Western China. This is in the turn of the 19th to 20th century. At the same time, he was looking for a modern, a route, a modern Silk Road, a route through the deserts of Western China that you could drive by car. So that was sort of the beginning of this project. So like I said, this talk is about the Wandering Lake, but I want to start with another piece that I've been working on. This piece is called Milk Debt. In the summer of 2018, I was overwhelmed by feelings of anxiety in relation to climate change and the current state of affairs in the US. I decided I would make a list of everything I was afraid of at that moment. So I happened to be researching at the Huntington Libraries in San Marino, California, which is not far from where I live now. And that summer, it hit 117 degrees. The research space was well climate controlled and very comfortable at 68 degrees. So as with any serious research facility, you have to use their note-taking paper. The Huntington's paper is pink, has their logo at the top. And so I made my list that was 4 pages long. This is the first page. I'll just read off the list. Death, Leroy's future death, death of the human species, death of the earth, but that's irrational, flooding, drowning in a flood, fire, burning in a fire, heights, smog, 113 degrees every day, water running out, what terrible things will happen when the water runs out, what terrible things I will do when food and water are scarce. Leroy is an old man seeing, living, feeling the apocalypse if he makes it. Loss of meaning. Moving forward means moving closer to death. Lemmings, sharks in the water when I see a seal. Murky water, pitch black night. Drowning in murky water. Leroy in the ocean with a floaty. Pain, suffering, eating maggots. Since February 2019, I've been working on Milk Debt, and this is a multi-part video project of women pumping breast milk while reciting lists of fears. The fears are collected from various communities and specific geographical regions. Milk Debt is a project where I explore environmental and affective concerns. This project creates a snapshot of the current environmental, political, and affective moment. Sites of conflict over democracy, nationalism, citizenry, human rights, borders, climate change, migration, and a woman's body is the context in which this project unfolds. The aim of the project is to take the effective temperature at this moment in history where concerns about climate change, migration, economic instability, alienation, xenophobia, and racism are imminent. How do we acknowledge the uncertainty in daily life? The title Milk Debt refers to the idea in Chinese Buddhism that a child is forever indebted to its mother for the milk she gave. Breast milk is created from blood when the body starts to produce the hormones prolactin and oxytocin. Oxytocin is also produced when one is in love. In this state of love and survival, milk debt is an arrangement that binds us to our history and to the earth. It is an unpayable debt. The performance acts as a type of ritual in which the performer channels the fears of others into public speech, in turn transforming them from the individual into the communal. Last year, I was a visiting artist at Hong Kong University, and I was invited to work with the students on a project and to participate in a conference titled Old Land, New Grounds. It was an academic conference dealing with geography and land, which affects Hong Kong especially because land is limited and what they have is impacted. Instead of thinking literally of land, I wanted to think about the affective states of people occupying a particular place. And I worked with students at Hong Kong University to gather lists of fears from their communities, and I worked with a woman who was both a school teacher and a lactation activist to perform the list. Milk Debt was staged as a live performance where a list of fears gathered from people living in Hong Kong was read by a performer pumping breast milk who lives in Hong Kong for an audience of people in Hong Kong. The date of the live performance was June 8th, 2019. And the next day on June 9th was the first large protest against the extradition bill, the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance bill, where estimated close to 1 million people demonstrated in Hong Kong. We performed Milk Debt on an overhead walkway at the beginning of the march, and I'm going to show the entirety of this video, which is 7 minutes.
I will live like a zombie in this city. I fear that I won't even feel or experience the midlife crisis, as I'm so used to the way of life here. I have lost my ability to see things beyond the surface. I'm horrified by the possibility that I will become someone who feels numb or insensitive about everything in life. I fear that I will become them, the bankers, the real estate agents, the lawyers, the overworked doctors. I fear that I will have no identity or personality except for the job I have. He is after my family, my insurance, my job, my car, and my dog. He likes me because I'm not threatening to him. He chooses me because he's tired of dating and feels ready to settle down. He chooses me because I remind him of someone he truly loves. He will regret that decision and blame me for it. I fear that my father's house will be confiscated by a developer one day. A construction company will stop by and the land I used to play on will be all gone. The place will be turned into tasteless mansions that people buy not to live in but to invest. No matter what I do, it will never be good enough. My skin color will still hinder me from getting the jobs I want, from getting the respect I need. When I work in a bank, I will be mistaken for a bodyguard or security because my accent or skin color. My husband will die early. My husband will die. One day he will wake up and realize I'm a shitty person. Going outside the line, erratic scheduling, losing control. I have already lost control. I have obsessive-compulsive disorder. I'm offending those who actually have obsessive-compulsive disorder. My mother, but only in the context of myself. She will read my stories one day and realize everything is about her. She will think she made all of me and I will lose autonomy over myself. I was right, and she did love her more. I'm a terrible daughter. I'm irrationally selfish. I am too anxious. I'm too old to try new things. Childbirth, cysts growing and exploding inside of me. My impending deafness, noise-canceling headphones. One day I will have no place to go. When I try to book a flight or hotel, my passport will be invalid. I cannot locate my place of birth on a booking site or in applying for a credit card. I will be questioned at customs with people not knowing what to do with my IDs. My children will become stateless citizens. I cannot travel abroad anymore. I will leave and cannot return. They are going to get us. They are going to confiscate all my cell phone data and email and locate us. They will publish a list of where I've been to, whom I've met, and who I've had intimacy with. They will make a list of all of us and shame us. Those who never said a thing about my sexuality, my life, my social life will turn against me. I'm afraid of what they will find out. I'm afraid you will die of cancer. I will respond inappropriately. You will have to undergo chemotherapy. You will lose all your hair and go bald. You will suffer, crying on the telephone. What I will say. I will not get to see you since I'm so far away. I will lose you. I will live too long and watch all my friends pass away. Becoming more antisocial and overcompensating by being obsessed with social media. Becoming indifferent and less sensitive to injustice. Ageism and the ageism I will face when I get old. Becoming emotionally overattached to my pets. Endless dreams. My children will become domestic helpers like me. My children will be abused when working as domestic helpers. They will have a university degree but still have to work as domestic helpers in Hong Kong. That cycle will never end. A homogenous world. Extinction of more languages. Every culture turning into a tourist cliche. Immobility. Losing my mother tongue. Lacking the drive to travel because everywhere is the same. When things get serious and desperate, no prayer will be effective. The relationship I think I've established with God is just a fantasy. When things get serious and desperate, I pray, and all I can hear is silence. Low GPA, no job. High GPA, but still no job. Meaningless internships, not getting credit for what I've done. Being used, unable to pay student loans, always in debt. Not enough transferable skills upon graduation. Getting a job that anyone can be qualified for. Jokes about failed college students. My degree means nothing, and I need another one to get an entry-level job. Over-information, fake accounts, fake likes, fake activists, fake company addresses, fake confidence, fake tweets, multiple personalities. My son will still be bothered by comments that people made online, even when he turns 30. He will cut ties with me when I tell him again to stop posting things on the internet. He is addicted to that and acts crazy. All the friends he has are just strangers online. He will cut ties with me when I stop the Wi-Fi stuff. Addiction. Living in a big house all by myself. Not being close with my family anymore. Not being loved as who I really am. Not being able to understand what people really mean in their words. Having to socialize too much. The desire to disconnect from everyone. Not finding anywhere that I belong. Looking in a mirror and not recognizing myself. Dying in a painfully slow way. To never meet someone like you. Wanting to end myself sometimes. The urge to destroy people I love. Not being able to make art anymore. Being interested in what I used to hate. Becoming another person who might actually be the real me. Knowing that hatred will never go away. Being ignorant. Mosquitoes flying past my ears while I'm in bed. Bumping into my ex. To learn that my dad might actually have other kids with another woman. My language dying out. Hong Kong slowly becoming China. Traditional Chinese characters being replaced by simplified Chinese. The Hong Kong I see now will become history. The Hong Kong I see today will become history. Going to Europe, being identified as Chinese, Japanese, me calling them out, and them raping me and beating me up. War, earthquakes, being smothered by bricks and concrete, being shot in America, experiencing a terrorist attack, being watched by camera in my own home, being watched by my webcam, seeing myself on a porn site, losing the ability to fight back, being held down by fears and carrying regrets, starfish, torn photos or maps, waves at night, animals caught in plastic, dead whales, chimpanzees eating monkeys, how fast food fried chicken is made, dormant volcanoes, injured athletes, snakes chasing rabbits, the smell of blood coming up from my body. Climate change, societal disintegration and economic collapse under climate change, rising water levels and flooding, food and water shortages, communistic protests in Hong Kong, communist liberation of Taiwan, Article 23, fugitive offenders ordinance, real estate prices, underemployment due to my humanities degree, becoming penniless in my old age, inflation, never amounting to anything, embarrassing myself. When my parents die, I will be all alone in the world. I will die too soon before my parents, and I'm afraid that I will lose them in despair and uncared. I will not die soon enough before the world deteriorates into some sort of a living hell. Losing my memory, I won't be able to recognize my children even if they speak to me. I won't be able to recognize myself. I won't be able to recognize anything, even my body. I won't be able to speak because I've forgotten language.
Bodily affect produces place and vice versa. Milk Debt is about how human affective states are directly related to the land and the production of landscape. Hong Kong University's conference was about place and geography. Place doesn't exist without people, points of view, and how it is understood. In Hong Kong, people's fear, since it is such a small place, are inevitably linked to place. Geography is inevitably political and economic. With this in mind, I will now begin a performative reading of a portion of my book, The Wandering Lake. A few days before I arrive in Fogo, a dead sperm whale washed up onto the shore. Its head was lodged in some rocks, but its body floated freely with the waves. The entire first week I was there, at the end of June, the weather was really bad, rain and wind every day. On the first clear day, I wanted to walk across the island. We lived in the middle, and I walked 11 miles to one end, where I decided to wash the dead whale. It was about 30 feet long and probably a young male. This experience of being in the water with this animal was very different from seeing it on the edge of the rocks. I had never been in the water with such a large dead being before. In fact, I'd never seen anything so large and dead before. My sense of mortality was overwhelming. It was a sense of sorrow and indescribable emptiness. Washing a deceased body is a practice thought to purify and prepare it for the next stage. This ablution occurs in many religions, Judaism and Hinduism, for example. It is a way of caring and connecting and at the same time letting go. The daily ritual of cleaning allows for mourning and honoring in our everyday life. The island of Newfoundland is situated at the easternmost point of North America. Neighboring Fogo Island is an old fishing island. Since the 1992 moratorium on cod, people do not fish there anymore for money. The lack of industry recently prompted the formation of an art residency, which was hoped to generate art tourism. The idea was that one can lead with the arts, and economy would follow. The location of the residency is interesting. If you have read Mark Kurlansky's Cod, a biography from 1997, you'll know that the waters off Newfoundland are where the Basques came to fish for cod in the 1400s. They kept this fishing ground secret, fearing others would follow. But the New World would not be secret for long. Moby Dick was written at the tail end of the whaling industry in the mid-1800s, not many years before the discovery of oil. Moby Dick is often seen as an allegory of American expansion and of colonization fueled by whaling industry wealth. Perhaps this melancholy connects with a feeling of the end of empire, a mourning of times past. From the chapter, The Fountain, in Herman Melville's Moby Dick from 1851. Quote, "Let us then look at this matter along with some interesting items contingent. Everyone knows that by the peculiar cunning of their gills, the finning tribes in general breathe the air in which at all times is combined with the element in which they swim. Hence, a herring or a cod might live a century and never once raise its head above the surface. But owing to his marked internal structure, which gives him regular lungs, like a human being's, the whale can only live by inhaling the disengaged air in the open atmosphere. Wherefore the necessity for his periodical visits to the upper world. But if he cannot in any degree breathe through his mouth, for in his ordinary attitude, the sperm whale's mouth is buried at least 8 feet beneath the surface. And what is still more, his windpipe has no connection with his mouth. No, he breathes through his spiracle alone, and this is on the top of his head. If I say that in any creature, breathing is only a function indispensable to vitality, inasmuch as it withdraws from the air a certain element, which being subsequently brought into contact with the blood, imparts to the blood its vivifying principle, I do not think I shall err, though I may possibly use some superfluous scientific words. Assume it, and it follows that if all the blood in a man could be aerated with one breath, he might then seal up his nostrils and not fetch another for a considerable time. That is to say, he would then live without breathing. Until it's over, you can be unaware of what stage you are in the grieving process. In New York, after September 11th, I was unsure about what to do with myself creatively. I had just mounted an exhibition. I felt frozen, disconnected, and anxious. At the time, it seemed normal to have anxiety and recurring dreams about airplanes. During this period, I sifted through snapshots of friends and family and began making watercolors of them as a way to make images with water and to spend time thinking about the people in my life. My morning took the form of reinforcing relationships and spending time with people I cared about by sifting through photos, choosing photos, and watercoloring them. It was a pleasure to spend time looking at these pictures, and recreating them was an excuse to indulge in an activity that had filled me with joy and comfort as a child. After I was finished, I gave the watercolors to the people in them. It seems selfish and personal, and I'm a little embarrassed by my sentimental impulse. Thinking about where the watercolors might have ended up, hung on the wall, kept in storage, lost or stolen, compelled me to contact some of the people I had made drawings for to ask them to document what they had done with them. I arrived in the capital of Uzbekistan, Tashkent, after more than 24 hours of travel through Frankfurt and Astana, waiting overnight at the airport in Almaty with many other people, paying way too much for a nestea. There was a program on TV of Russian dancers on a variety show, just like the Saturday Night Live sketch of Fred Armisen sambaing. Flights landed and took off all night. The sun rose so slowly that it barely made it off the ground at 8 a.m. There was so much haze during takeoff, many factories surrounded the city. Before my translator, Kamola, and I went to buy our plane tickets for Nukus, the city closest to the Aral Sea and the largest city in western Uzbekistan, we needed to change money. She brought me to see an old Korean guy hanging out on the sidewalk outside the Moskva liquor store. Moskva was accented with little top hats dancing above its letters. We gave him $500 for a bag of money bigger than a shoebox, 1,380,000 som. It felt strange to need such a big bag to carry cash. Exhausted by the day, I ate eggs Benedict and carrot soup and bought apples at the bazaar. Smells I noticed, petrol from the cars, fried foods. Even in the street, where restaurants are not apparent, there were odors of bodies and interiors. The bazaar smells of spices and cooking oil. Extraordinary, dusty street smells. The only reading I brought with me was Mother Reader, Essential Writings on Motherhood from 2001, edited by Moira Davey, and Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children from 1981, about partition and the birth and mix-up of fraternal twins at the stroke of midnight on the day of the birth of Pakistan. Blueberry and peach passion fruit down in yogurt, Coke, peach nectar, pomegranate juice, black bread, cheese spread, tomatoes, cucumbers, mandarin oranges. The following day was hard. I woke up at 5 a.m. to catch a plane to Nukus. The plane had a propeller and was extremely old. While waiting at the gate at the brand new airport, I saw a guy being sent through the security on a gurney. He had a floral blanket covering him, and the guards kept checking under the blanket. The smell of people in the airport was intense, mostly men, some women, and children. Kamola says the smell of people is of unwashed bodies and the food they eat. She says the Uzbeks have a distinct smell: body oil, unwashed clothes. I made the mistake of eating 2 apples when I woke up, then an orange at the airport. The ride was extremely turbulent. Almost immediately, I got nauseous. I proceeded to get violently sick twice in the toilet, as if I had too many margaritas on a bender. It was sour like limes and tequila, and brutal to the point of dry heaving post-bile. My aim wasn't so good due to the turbulence. From Heidi Murkoff and Sharon Mazel's What to Expect When You're Expecting, 4th edition, 2008. Week 9, your baby, who has officially graduated now from embryo to fetus, has grown to approximately 1 inch in length, about the size of a medium green olive. His or her head is continuing to develop and take on more baby-like proportions. This week, tiny muscles are starting to form. This will allow your fetus to move his or her arms and legs, though it'll be at least another month before you'll be able to feel those little punches and kicks. While it's way too early to feel anything, it's not too early to hear something, possibly. The glorious sound of your baby's heartbeat might be audible via a Doppler device at your practitioner's office. Take a listen. It's sure to make your heart beat a little faster. Nukus felt to me like a small rural town in western China. Perhaps that was my closest frame of reference because Xinjiang is also predominantly Muslim. It is extremely flat. There was a film studio near the hotel, and I was curious about what they did there. We went to a small restaurant called S. It was musty and smelled strongly of a gamey meat, like it had never been cleaned. The tables were in private booths partitioned by fabric. I got a bowl of borscht and a plate of fried eggs and a Coca-Cola. The eggs were a bad idea. Anything fried in oil is a bad idea. We tried to go to a small stadium for the yearly Navruz celebrations, but were denied because we are foreign. They knew that Kamola was from the city. I had to sleep again until evening. Intense nausea. From Natalia Antilova's Forced Sterilization of Women in Uzbekistan, 2013. During his annual address 2 years ago, President Karimov designated 2012 as the Year of the Family and said, "Everyone is aware of how much effort and funds have been put toward the protection of motherhood and childhood, including the construction in the capital city and the regions of diagnostic, screening, and perinatal centers, and new maternity complexes supplied with modern medical equipment. In all the regions of the country, practically the entire population is provided with medical examinations and ultrasound checkups at countryside medical stations and specialized centers supplied with modern equipment. It is hard to find analogies to preventative measures being adopted in Uzbekistan that protect the population's reproductive health by strengthening the health of pregnant women. According to the number of respected international institutions, Uzbekistan occupies one of the leading places among 125 countries of the world on the level of favorable conditions created for women and protection of motherhood. The UNICEF Regional Office for Eastern Europe, Baltics, and CIS recognized Uzbekistan to be the regional model on introducing programs in the area of protection of motherhood and childhood. In the town of Moynak, Uzbekistan, sits the Museum of Local Lore. Housed in a municipal building where across the hall you can apply for a marriage certificate, the museum is open by appointment only. According to their website, the main reason for a visit to Moynak is to witness the death throes of the Aral Sea and the dramatic sight of dozens of deserted fishing boats rusting at their moorings, submerged in sand, or riding the crest of a sand dune. By contrast, the museum is a humble display of local animal pelts, painted shorelines, and canned fish stacked in pyramids. The Aral Sea was once the world's fourth largest inland sea. It has lost over 80% of its water, thanks to large-scale Soviet irrigation projects. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union successfully turned the dry lands of Central Asia into a giant cotton plantation by creating thousands of miles of canals, dams, and reservoirs in 5 Central Asian republics to irrigate the croplands. This shifting of the paths of water destined for the Aral Sea was initiated with the knowledge that the sea would likely disappear. We went to Moynak by taxi. Before we left Nukus, I bought some Russian crackers and peach and pomegranate juice from a shop. Almost 3 hours out of the city, we passed a cotton storage facility. You cannot take pictures of it. Much of the highway was under construction, and we drove on a dirt path parallel to the road. We arrived in Moynak just as the Nowruz celebration was starting. We took our cameras, saying we were simply filming the festival. They had photo stations set up, one of cherry or apricot blossoms in front of telephone poles. The photographer was on crutches. From Heidi Murkoff and Sharon Mazel's What to Expect When You're Expecting 4th edition, 2008. Fatigue, lack of energy, sleepiness, frequent urination, nausea with or without vomiting, excessive saliva, constipation, heartburn, indigestion, flatulence, bloating, food aversions and cravings, breast changes, fullness, heaviness, tenderness, tingling, darkening of the areolas, lubrication glands in the areolas becoming prominent like large goosebumps, expanding network of bluish lines under your skin, visible veins on your abdomen, legs, and elsewhere as your blood supply pumps up, slight increase in vaginal discharge, occasional headaches, occasional faintness or dizziness, a little more rounding of your belly, your clothes feel a little snugger. I interviewed Kamola's grandmother and uncle who live in Konigrat, 1.5 hours from Moynak. She worked in the cotton industry for 45 years and grew fruit and vegetables on the side. In 1977, they bought a car and started going to Moynak to sell them. Moynak was once the largest port in the Aral Sea, with fishermen and a canning industry. Everyone was too busy fishing to grow vegetables. Kamola's grandmother grew carrots, potatoes, apricot trees, melons, and tomatoes and cucumbers after the Koreans came. They don't allow you to take photos of anything man-made, industrial, the gas station, bridge, or cotton facility. Everyone knows the rules. I started thinking I cannot work here because it's too controlled. Since the sea shrank and receded, Moynak is in the middle of a desert. The thousands of miles of pipelines and canals that irrigate water away from the Aral Sea are proof that the sea still retains its power and volume. It was just circling and weaving and lacing the landscape in intricate patterns, probably not visible from space, but possibly from an airplane. Human innovation had misguided the water into holding patterns of absent-mindedness. But if it is true what they say, that water has a perfect memory and always returns to where it came from, then the invocations will certainly call them back home. Invocation of loss of balance. Invocation of falling. Invocation of motor control. Invocation of envy. Invocation of incontinence. Invocation of caregiving. Invocation of catheter. Invocation of daily life. Invocation of isolation. Invocation of shame. Invocation of guilt. Invocation of longing. Invocation of fainting. Invocation of restless skies. Invocation of a fracture. Invocation of humiliation. Invocation of a shadow. Invocation of inappropriate laughing or crying. Invocation of medical directive. Invocation of wandering lake. Invocation of end-of-life care. Invocation of writing with light. Invocation of evaporation. Invocation of bureaucratic waste. Invocation of double helix. Invocation of dementia. Invocation of grief. Invocation of artificial respiration. Invocation of feeding tube. Invocation of dry baths. Invocation of vocal cord paralysis. Invocation of morphine suppositories. Invocation of noise-reducing headphones. Invocation of silence. Invocation of slurry, croaky voice. Invocation of gasping. I interviewed Kamola's grandmother again. I asked her to draw a map of where she used to sell vegetables in Moynak, but immediately Kamola's uncle said she wouldn't be able to do it, so he helped her. I wondered how I might work in this place without filming and imagined throwing dust and shooting that because it is nothing and it disappears immediately. I knew I shouldn't give up so easily, but it took me time to adjust to the environment. It wasn't as comfortable as I'm used to, and I wasn't sure if it was the pregnancy and morning sickness, or if when I traveled before, it was also uncomfortable and I just didn't remember. Then I remembered my trip to Shangri-La in rural China, where I lived in an unheated Tibetan house with only a public pit toilet for 3 months. From the future, it didn't seem so bad. From Heidi Murkoff and Sharon Mazel's What to Expect When You're Expecting 4th edition, 2008. Emotional ups and downs like the amped-up PMS, which may include mood swings, irritability, irrationality, inexplicable weepiness, misgivings, fear, joy, elation, any or all of these. A sense of unreality about the pregnancy. Is there really a baby in there? Timur told us about the last Russian in Moynak who got a grant to take soil from the Surdarya River and plant trees in the city because it has become a desert climate. 11 Russian families apparently still live in Moynak. The last Russian from Moynak is named Vladimir. He agreed to meet with us. He said to come to his home, which has 4 trees planted outside and a blue gate. I went back to Nukus on a French plane, not a Russian. SpongeBob was on the TV in the hotel. He was directing boats on wheels through an intersection because he was wearing a uniform. Heidi Murkoff and Sharon Meisel's What to Expect When You're Expecting, 4th edition, 2008. Week 10, at nearly 1.5 inches, about the size of a prune, your baby is growing by leaps and bounds. And in gearing up for those first leaps and bounds and baby steps, bones and cartilage are forming, and small indentations in the legs are developing into knees and ankles. Even more unbelievably, for someone the size of a prune, the elbows on baby's arms are already working. Tiny buds of baby teeth are already forming under the gums. Moynak is not in bloom this time of year. Vladimir has many cats that come in and out of the garden, which he said overflows in summer. He also has a swimming pool and a sauna in his yard. He used to be a pilot and flew many flights a day to Tashkent, but now there is no airport. His house is entirely covered in fabrics and carpets. I had been terribly nauseous during the car ride from Nukus, and when we got to his house, the food he offered us smelled very strong. I had trouble concentrating and didn't remember what I wanted to ask him, and he didn't want to be videotaped. We had tea with sour cherry jam. I could barely stomach it, but didn't want to be rude, so I ate a little. The black tea was salty, like all the tea in the area. The water from the earth is salty, affecting the taste of the food and drink. The groundwater seeped up salty and Kongrat after the Aral Sea disappeared. Moynak's canneries were so busy during World War II that the Soviet government sent Russians to work in them, packing fish for the soldiers on the front lines. People worked nonstop to send food to the military. Vladimir remembered a film made on the streets of Moynak called The Fishermen of the Aral Sea. It was a Russian movie with local actors. He lent me 2 buckets of water so that I could film the washing on the Aral seabed. I heard a news report on public radio about a secret sterilization program the government of Uzbekistan had been conducting on women in the country. Some women didn't even know they were being sterilized until they went to the doctor because they couldn't get pregnant. To limit the number of babies born, some women were automatically sterilized when they had a C-section. Sometimes they were told they could reverse the procedure when they were ready to get pregnant again. From Alice Walker's One Child of One's Own, A Meaningful Digression Within the Works, 1979, in Mother Reader, Essential Writings on Motherhood, edition edited by Moira Davey, 2001, quote, "For those of us who both love and fear the child because of the work we do, but who would be lovers only if we could, I propose and defend a plan of life that encourages one child of one's own, which I consider a meaningful, some might say necessary, digression within the works. It is perfectly true that I, like many other women who work, especially as writers, was terrified of having children. I feared being fractured by the experience, if not overwhelmed. I thought the quality of my writing would be considerably diminished by motherhood, that nothing that was good for my writing could come out of having children. My first mistake was in thinking children instead of child. My second was in seeing the child as my enemy, rather than the racism and sexism of an oppressive capitalist society. My third was in believing none of the benefits of having a child would accrue in my writing. Someone asked me once whether I thought women artists should have children. I gave my answer promptly. Yes, I said, somewhat to my surprise. And as if to amend my rashness, I added, they should have children, assuming this is of interest to them, but only one. Why only one, this someone wanted to know. Because with one, you can move, I said. With more than one, you're a sitting duck. I went back to Uzbekistan 2 years later. I wanted to return so I could try again to go to the very edge of the Aral Sea, since it was impossible on my first trip because the land was frozen. The second time around, we flew from New York to Almaty to Tashkent, then to Nukus before taking a taxi to Moynak. From there, we hired a driver to drive 5 hours over the dry seabed to the water's edge. I was weaning my son Leroy, and I decided that I would continue to pump breast milk during the trip. I would usually pump it while we were sitting for a meal. Afterwards, I would dump the milk into any available receptacle and take a snapshot. Uzbekistan is a police state. These photos kind of stood in for my inability to represent and were also a sympathetic loss of flow. From Jill Cassid's epilogue, Landscape in, Around, and Under the Performative, 2011. Thesis 1, Landscape is. This form of the simple present is and is not an illusion. Landscape's appearance of mere being, its isness, does not make landscape a simple thing. For landscape to be, for it to function as ground, setting, locus, or environment, it must take place. Landscape's isness should thus be understood as an effect of what landscape does. Its intransitive action resides in this transit between the verb and the noun. Landscape's intransitive, simple present performs the action of creating the seemingly unchanging effect of an eternal, continuous present, an immutable or even sufficient ground for action or claim. Landscape's isness does not just make up the setting, stage, space, or frame of the performative, but supplies its very condition. The illusion of isness is so strong that one of the most powerful and resilient effects of landscape is this impression of simple being in an eternal and immutable present that has not and can never be otherwise, an effect otherwise known as naturalization. On January 11th, 2014, Shangri-La, China burned to the ground. The only edifice left standing was a 5-story Tibetan prayer wheel that advertised itself as the largest in the world. It survived mainly because it was made of metal painted gold. In better seasons, at least 6 people were necessary to spin it. The only water tower in town held 800 tons and was exhausted in 10 minutes. Even the glacial waters of the sacred snow mountain that draws Buddhists and tourists alike to Shangri-La couldn't save the burning city. Some, mostly liberal Westerners, said good riddance, as Shangri-La had become a Disneyland with singing, dancing minorities on every corner. Shangri-La is a town in Western China renamed from Zhongdian in 2001 to create a tourist destination. It was promoted as the original place where British writer James Hilton based his fictional Hamlet in the 1933 novel Lost Horizon. It rightly beat out other towns claiming to be the original Shangri-La, the city widely known as heaven on earth. In Shangri-La, people were content, they lived a very long time, there was gold everywhere, and the air had a, quote, tranquil, anesthetizing quality. The monks in Shangri-La busied themselves by amassing all of Western civilization's inventions for the inevitable time when men would arm themselves and blow one another up. They believed that a kinder, more harmonious race would then blossom. All of Western civilization was collected in a small museum behind the reception hall for domesticated tourists. No cameras were allowed inside, but the museum staff would lend you a chair, and you could stay all day if you had the time. The day after the fire in Shangri-La, adjusters came to assess the damage. After sifting through burned remnants all day, they were able to recover some United States government film canisters, whose contents documented experiments in casting semi-permanent shadows. The intense heat of the atomic bomb dropped by the US on Hiroshima and Nagasaki caused flash burns that sometimes left shadow imprints on the surface of buildings and structures very far from the explosion itself. From an exhibition label at the Museum of Fine Art, Boston, tea bowl with impression of a leaf. Southern Song Dynasty, 12th to 13th centuries. Juzhou-ware, stoneware. From early times, Chinese potters understood that the ashes of plant materials could melt directly into glazes. Nevertheless, it was an unexpected flight of imagination to embed a leaf under the dark glazes of this bowl, which was fired to a glassy pool of rich colors that retains the shadow of the leaf. It is like a proto-photograph, conjuring a dangerous mimetic magic, suspending the leaf in the midst of falling. It is a tea bowl, but the leaf embedded in the bowl is in fact not a tea leaf, but a birch leaf. The word birch is thought to have derived from the Sanskrit word burga, meaning a tree whose bark is used to write upon. A birch bark manuscript from the 13th century is the oldest known document of any Finnic language. It was found in 1957 by a Soviet expedition off the coast near Novgorod in Western Russia. A Russian scholar believes that it is an invocation against lightning. According to superstitious notions, naming gives one magical powers over an object or phenomenon. 3 interpretations of the birch bark manuscript exist. According to Google Translate, they roughly translate as follows. God, boom. 10 names of your bow, arrow, that it belongs to God. God sends judgment. God, boom. 10 names of yours. Sparkling boom, boom, shoot. Judgment, because God produces. God boom. Human boom, and boom itself. God, God of judgment, hold. Thank you.